Chapter 1. The question she didn't mean to ask. Sara Morrison had planned to arrive late and leave early. It was a strategy she'd perfected over the years. Slip into family events just long enough to be counted, long enough to hug the people who mattered most, and short enough to avoid the inevitable questions. She had even rehearsed her exit line in the car. Early meeting tomorrow. Big project. You know how it is. She did, in fact, know how it was. Her professional life was a series of early mornings, late nights, and competence so consistent that people stopped remarking on it. At 28, she had the job title, the apartment with actual art on the walls, the retirement account she checked more often than her bank balance. On paper, her life looked stable. Impressive, even. It was the rest of it that felt like a mess. The Morrison family did not believe in small gatherings. Ruth's backyard was already full when Sara arrived. Folding chairs lining the grass. Long tables sagging under aluminum trays and covered dishes. Children ran between adults like unpredictable weather systems. Someone had strung lights between the trees, even though the sun was still high. Sara took a breath, pasted on her social smile, and stepped into the noise. Look who finally showed up. That was her cousin Mark, already holding a beer, already grinning. Sara hugged him, then his wife, then their 2 kids in quick succession. She moved down the line like a professional, accepting compliments on her dress, dodging questions about her love life with practiced agility. So, are you seeing anyone? Still focusing on work? You know, my coworker's son is single. She laughed when she was supposed to laugh. She nodded when she was supposed to nod. She redirected conversations with ease. No one noticed the way her shoulders stayed tight, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. Across the yard, her grandfather Carl stood at the grill like a benevolent king, flipping burgers and telling the same story he told every year, the one about burning his first Thanksgiving turkey. Her aunts and uncles clustered around him, laughing in anticipation of the punchline they already knew. Sara paused, watching them. It struck her, suddenly and oddly, that she was looking at a future she didn't know how to reach. She handed off the gift she'd brought, a framed photograph from Ruth and Carl's early years, to her mother, then slipped inside the house under the pretense of getting more napkins. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. It was quieter, cooler. Sara exhaled. Sweetheart. Ruth stood in the hallway, her white hair pinned neatly back, her posture still straight at 80. She smiled when she saw Sara, the kind of smile that didn't ask for anything. There you are, Ruth said. I was hoping I'd get a moment with you. Sara swallowed. I brought you something. I wanted to give it to you myself. Ruth's eyes softened. Come with me. They walked down the hall to the sewing room. Everyone in the family knew the rule. When the sewing room door was closed, you knocked, or you waited. The room was warm and bright, filled with fabric, photographs, and the quiet hum of a life lived carefully. Sara handed over the gift. Ruth opened it slowly, her fingers tracing the frame. Oh, Ruth said softly. I'd forgotten this picture existed. You look happy, Sara said. Ruth glanced up. We were. They stood there for a moment, something heavy and tender settling between them. Ruth looked at Sara more closely then. How are you, really? The question landed harder than Sara expected. She opened her mouth, ready with the usual answer. Fine. Busy. Good. But something in her chest cracked open instead. I don't understand, Sara said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Why doesn't any man want me? Silence filled the room. Ruth didn't react with surprise. She didn't rush to reassure. She stepped forward and wrapped Sara in a hug that was firm and steady, the kind that didn't let go too quickly. Oh, honey, Ruth said. Come sit down. They sat side by side on the small couch. Sara stared at her hands, embarrassed now that the words were out. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did, Ruth said gently. And I'm glad you said it. Sara took a breath. I keep going on these dates, and they're awful. Or they're fine but not serious. Everyone says I'll meet someone when I stop looking, but I've stopped and started so many times I don't even know what that means anymore. Ruth listened without interrupting. I do everything right, Sara continued. I'm kind. I'm honest. I'm stable. And somehow I keep ending up with men who think dating is a hobby. Ruth smiled knowingly. Oh, I met a few of those. Sara looked up. You did. Of course, Ruth said. Your grandfather wasn't the only man who courted me. Sara leaned in. How did you know he was the one? Ruth laughed softly. Well, there was another man. Very handsome. Very wealthy. All the girls wanted him. And? Sara asked. Ruth stood and walked to the window. He's still alive. 5th marriage. The first 4 ended the same way. She gestured outside. Look. Sara followed her gaze. The yard was full, loud, imperfect, alive. That, Ruth said, is what choosing values looks like. Sara swallowed hard. I chose your grandfather because he was building something, and he wanted me to build it with him. She turned back, smiling. Stop chasing what's shiny. Start choosing what lasts. Ruth squeezed Sara's hand. You're not behind. You're just at the moment where you get to decide. She left Sara alone in the sewing room, the laughter from outside drifting in. Sara stayed by the window watching her family, feeling, for the first time in a long while, that maybe the problem wasn't her. Maybe it was what she'd been looking for. Chapter 2, Reframing the Problem. Sara did not sleep much that night. It wasn't that her mind raced in the frantic, spiraling way it sometimes did after a bad date or an awkward work presentation. This was quieter than that. Heavier. Ruth's words had settled somewhere deep and inconvenient, refusing to be ignored. Stop chasing what's shiny. Start choosing what lasts. Sara lay on her back, staring at the ceiling of her apartment, the faint glow of the city filtering through the curtains. She had replayed the scene in the sewing room so many times she could practically smell the fabric and lemon cleaner again. She rolled onto her side and grabbed her phone from the nightstand. Her dating app notifications stared back at her. 3 new likes. 1 message. She opened it. Hey gorgeous. Drinks tomorrow. No question mark. No context. No curiosity. Sara stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked the phone and set it face down. For the first time, she didn't feel flattered. She felt tired. The next morning, Sara sat at her kitchen table with a mug of coffee she'd reheated twice without drinking. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the neatness she'd curated so carefully. Minimalist furniture, framed prints, a plant she remembered to water on schedule. Her life was organized, her love life less so. She pulled out a notebook from her work bag, the good one, the one she usually reserved for project planning, and opened it to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, patterns. She hesitated, then started listing names. Ethan, Marcus, Luke, Ryan. That guy whose name she couldn't remember but who owned a boat and talked about it constantly. She drew a line under the list and began jotting notes. Charming, funny, great smile, bad listener, didn't ask questions, avoided anything resembling commitment. Her pen slowed. She flipped to the next page and wrote another heading, what I actually want. That list came harder. She chewed on the end of her pen, thinking of Ruth at the window, of Carl surrounded by their children. Someone reliable, someone kind, someone who wants to build something. She paused, then added, someone who wants me involved in their future. The words sat there, honest and exposed. Sara leaned back in her chair and laughed softly to herself. Well, she said to the empty apartment, that's inconvenient. At work, her focus was sharper than usual. She powered through meetings, finalized a proposal, fielded a last-minute client request without breaking stride. Her colleagues praised her efficiency. Her boss nodded approvingly. During lunch, her friend Maya slid into the chair across from her, balancing a salad and an expression that promised gossip. So, Maya said, how was your weekend? Did you survive the family extravaganza? Sara smiled. Barely. And, Maya prompted, any eligible cousins of cousins of cousins? No, Sara said. But I did get a lecture from my grandmother that may have permanently altered my brain chemistry. Maya's eyebrows shot up. That's ominous. Sara hesitated, then told her everything. The sewing room, the other man, the 5th marriage, the backyard full of proof. Maya listened, chewing thoughtfully. Ha! She said when Sara finished. Your grandma sounds wise. She is, Sara said. And also incredibly inconvenient. Maya laughed. Because she's right? Sara sighed. Because if she's right, then I've been choosing wrong. For years. Maya tilted her head. So what are you going to do? Sara picked at her salad. I don't know yet, but I think I need to stop treating dating like something that just happens to me. Maya smiled. Look at you. Setting intentions. Don't get used to it, Sara said dryly. That evening, Sara stood in the middle of her living room with her phone in hand. She opened the dating app again, scrolled. Faces blurred together, smiles, gym selfies, bios heavy on sarcasm and light on substance. She thought of Ruth's voice. Life is about priorities. With a decisive breath, Sara went into settings and hit deactivate. The app asked her if she was sure. Yes, she said aloud, pressing confirm. The silence afterward was startling. She didn't feel relieved. Not exactly, but she felt lighter. Sara set the phone down and looked around her apartment. Okay, she murmured. Now what? She didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she'd asked the right question. Chapter 3, The Unimpressive Man. Sara met Ben Carter on a Tuesday afternoon that had already disappointed her. The copy machine on her floor was broken. Again. And the client call she just finished had gone 10 minutes over because someone on the other end refused to read the agenda she'd sent in advance. Sara stood in the hallway with a folder tucked under her arm, weighing whether it was worth the effort to walk down 2 flights of stairs to the communal printer, or if she could postpone printing altogether. She chose the stairs. The building's lower-level conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Sara slid her badge through the printer room door and immediately groaned. Of course. A man stood hunched over the machine, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed, the printer's access panel hanging open like a patient mid-surgery. Paper was scattered on the floor around him. Oh, Sara said before she could stop herself. Please tell me you're fixing it and not making it worse. He startled slightly and turned. He was fine. That was the most charitable description her brain offered. Average height. Brown hair that looked like it had met a comb earlier that day but hadn't committed. Button-down shirt, neatly pressed, but not in a way that screamed effort. "Jury's still out," he said. "But I promise I had nothing to do with the initial crime." Sara exhaled, some of her irritation dissipating. "Good, because I'm dangerously close to committing one." He smiled politely, not dazzling, just polite. "I'm Ben," he said. "Facilities roped me into attempting CPR." "Sara," she replied. "Project management. Frequent victim." Ben nodded sympathetically. "That tracks." He gestured to the printer's innards. "Paper jam that turned into a paper rebellion. I think I've negotiated a ceasefire." Sara watched as he reassembled the machine with careful efficiency. He didn't curse, didn't sigh dramatically. He simply worked. A minute later, the printer whirred back to life. Ben straightened, brushing his hands together. "There we go." Sara fed her documents into the tray, half expecting another failure. The machine complied. She stared at the freshly printed pages as if they'd performed a magic trick. "You just saved me," she said solemnly. "I was one jam away from quitting my job and opening a candle business." Ben chuckled. "Happy to help." She gathered her papers. "Well, thank you. I owe you something. A coffee? A cookie?" "Firstborn child." He waved it off. "No debt necessary." "Still," Sara said, "if I see you around, I'll repay the favor." Ben nodded. "I'll hold you to that." They parted ways with a polite smile and no sparks. Sara didn't think about him again for the rest of the day. She did, however, think about him the following morning when she arrived at a volunteer planning meeting she'd impulsively signed up for the night before. Community Garden Initiative, Orientation. Sara had hovered over the sign-up page for 10 full minutes before committing. It seemed like something she should do, something intentional, something future-oriented. She walked into the meeting room and scanned the small group gathered around the table. And there he was. Ben sat near the end, flipping through the orientation packet with the same quiet focus he'd given the printer. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Hey," he said. "Printer hero. Facilities miracle worker," Sara corrected. "I didn't know you volunteered." "I didn't either until last week," Ben admitted. "My neighbor guilted me into it." Sara laughed as she took the seat beside him. "Same. Except the neighbor was my conscience." The meeting began, and Sara found herself oddly at ease. Ben asked practical questions, took notes, offered to help without making a production of it. At one point, the coordinator mentioned long-term goals for the garden, sustainability, community engagement, future expansion. Ben leaned over and whispered, "I love when people say, 5-year plan, like it's casual conversation." Sara snorted before she could stop herself. She glanced at him, expecting embarrassment, but he looked amused. "What?" he whispered back. "Nothing," she said. "I just, same." After the meeting, they walked out together. "So," Ben said, "you live nearby?" "Couple of blocks," Sara replied. "You?" "Same. I moved here last year." They reached the corner and slowed, neither quite ready to break off. "Well," Sara said, "it was nice volunteering with you." Ben smiled. "Yeah, it was." There was a pause. A small one. An awkward one. "Do you want to?" Ben started. Sara's stomach tightened reflexively. "Walk back together?" he finished. Her tension eased. "Sure," she said. "That sounds nice." They walked in companionable silence for a block before Ben spoke again. "I hope this doesn't sound weird," he said, "but I appreciate how normal you are." Sara blinked. "Normal?" "Yeah," he said. "People tend to perform. It gets exhausting." She thought of Ruth's words. "Find a man who isn't trying to impress anyone." "That's funny," Sara said slowly. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." Ben glanced at her. "Good. Then we're evenly unimpressive." She laughed, really laughed, surprising herself. They stopped at her building. "Well," Sara said, "thanks for the walk." "Anytime," Ben said. "I'll see you around." As she went upstairs, Sara waited for the familiar post-interaction analysis, the checklist, the spark assessment, the internal verdict. It didn't come. Instead, she found herself thinking one unexpected thought. That was easy. And for the first time, easy didn't feel like a problem. Chapter 4, Values in Motion. Sara began noticing Ben in the margins of her week. Not in the cinematic way, no dramatic entrances, no lingering eye contact across crowded rooms, but in quieter, almost administrative moments. He showed up when he said he would. He followed through. He remembered things. The community garden project, which Sara had expected to be a one-time gesture toward being a well-rounded adult, quickly became a recurring fixture in her schedule. Saturday mornings were now claimed by gloves and dirt and the low, satisfying ache of doing something tangible. Ben was always there early. He didn't announce his presence or claim space. He just started, measuring plots, carrying lumber, asking the coordinator what needed doing next. Sara found herself working beside him more often than not. "You don't have to take the heavy ones every time," she said one morning as he lifted another bag of soil onto his shoulder. He glanced at her, mildly surprised. "I don't mind." I know, she said. That's the problem. He smiled, shifting the weight. Occupational hazard. Oldest sibling. That made her pause. How many? 3 younger sisters. Sara raised an eyebrow. That explains a lot. He laughed. Like what? You're prepared, she said, gesturing vaguely. You bring extra gloves. Snacks. Sunscreen. Ben shrugged. Experience. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Sara noticed how he checked the plans before making changes, how he asked for input rather than assuming authority. It was subtle, but it registered. She thought of the men she dated who talked over waiters, who treated plans like suggestions, who viewed responsibility as optional. The contrast was loud. Their conversations remained easy but unforced. They talked about work without complaining, about family without drama, about the strange satisfaction of watching something grow. Ben mentioned his job in city planning, the way he liked projects that lasted longer than a fiscal quarter. I like knowing what I'm building will still be here in 10 years, he said, kneeling to secure a wooden frame. Even if no one knows my name. Sara felt something shift. That night, she found herself recounting the day to her friend Maya over the phone. He's just consistent, Sara said. And that shouldn't feel revolutionary, but here we are. Maya hummed. Do you like him? Sara hesitated. I don't know. I don't feel fireworks. And I don't miss them, Sara admitted. The realization unsettled her more than she expected. She had always believed attraction was supposed to be immediate, overwhelming, unmistakable. This was slower, warmer, like something building instead of something burning out. One evening, after a long planning session, Ben walked her home again. Can I ask you something? He said as they stopped outside her building. Sure. Why did you join the garden project? He asked. You don't strike me as someone with a lot of spare time. Sara considered lying. Then she didn't. My grandmother turned 80, she said. And she reminded me that the future doesn't just happen. Ben nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like something worth remembering. She looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't impressive in the way she'd been taught to notice. But there was something steady in his presence, something that didn't demand attention but earned it. Well, Sara said, keys in hand. Thanks for the walk. Anytime, Ben said. See you Saturday? Yeah, she said. See you. As she went inside, Sara realized she was looking forward to it. Not because she expected anything to happen, but because she liked who she was becoming in the meantime. Chapter 5. The Old Reflex. Sara ran into Ryan on a Thursday evening when she was already proud of herself. She'd stayed late at work to finish a proposal instead of leaving early to scroll aimlessly through her phone. She'd cooked an actual meal, pasta with vegetables that had not come frozen in a bag. She was halfway home, mentally congratulating herself on the quiet competence of her life, when a familiar voice cut through the street noise. Well, if it isn't Sara Morrison. She stopped. There was no mistaking that voice. It carried confidence like a cologne, noticeable from a distance, impossible to ignore up close. She turned slowly. Ryan stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a sleek black car that looked expensive enough to require its own insurance category. He wore a tailored jacket, his hair styled with deliberate effort. He smiled like he expected the world to smile back. Ryan, Sara said. Wow. Hi. Wow is right, he said, grinning. You look incredible. There it was. The old reflex stirred before she could stop it. The instinctive straightening of her posture, the small, traitorous thrill of being noticed by someone who always noticed himself first. Thanks, she said, carefully neutral. What are the odds? Ryan asked. I was just thinking about you. Sara doubted that, but she smiled anyway. They made small talk. Work. The city. His latest venture, which he described vaguely but enthusiastically. He gestured often, his watch catching the light. So, he said, leaning in slightly, we should catch up. Drinks. Somewhere nice. The word nice landed exactly where he intended it to. Sara hesitated. Old Sara would have said yes without thinking. Old Sara would have enjoyed the anticipation, the polished charm, the way Ryan knew how to make an evening feel like an event. New Sara, who was still very much under construction, felt a flicker of doubt. I'm pretty busy, she said, which was true, just not in the way Ryan assumed. Ryan laughed lightly. Come on, you can spare an hour. She thought of Ben, of Saturday mornings and dirt under her nails, of conversations that didn't feel like performances. I'll think about it, she said. Ryan's smile faltered just a fraction. You do that. They exchanged a quick goodbye, and Sara walked away before she could overthink it. Her phone buzzed before she reached the corner. Ryan. Still have the same number. That's a good sign. Ryan. Friday night? I'll pick the place. Sara stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. The next morning at the garden site, Sara was quieter than usual. Ben noticed. You okay? He asked, handing her a pair of gloves. Yeah, she said automatically. Then, after a beat, just distracted. He nodded, not pressing. We're planting the tomatoes today. Low-pressure task. She smiled faintly. My favorite kind. They worked side by side, the rhythm familiar now. Sara watched Ben as he measured spacing, explaining his reasoning to one of the newer volunteers with patient clarity. Roots need room, he said. Crowding them just causes problems later. The words stuck with her. At lunch break, Sara checked her phone again. Another message from Ryan. Ryan, you always did like a little spontaneity, winking face, she sighed. Everything okay? Ben asked, sitting beside her on the low retaining wall. She considered deflecting. Then she didn't. I ran into someone I used to date, she said. Ben's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. Ah, he asked me out, she added, unsure why she felt the need to clarify. Ben nodded slowly. Are you going to go? Sara opened her mouth, then closed it. I don't know, she said honestly. Part of me wants to. Ben looked at her, then really looked at her. There was no accusation in his gaze. No competition. That makes sense, he said. History has momentum. She blinked. You're not upset? He shrugged. We're friends. You don't owe me anything. The words were reasonable, mature. They also stung. Sara spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, hyper-aware of the distance that hadn't been there before. Ben wasn't cold. He wasn't withdrawn. He was exactly the same. And somehow that was worse. That night, Sara sat on her couch with her phone in her hand, Ryan's last message glowing insistently. She thought of Ruth's sewing room, of the window, of a life built choice by choice. She typed, Sara, I don't think it's a good idea. Take care, Ryan. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. A moment later, her phone buzzed. Ryan, wow. Didn't expect that. Ryan, your loss. Sara exhaled, a strange mix of relief and grief washing over her. She set the phone down and stared at the wall. It hadn't felt dramatic. It hadn't felt triumphant. It had felt intentional. The following Saturday, Sara arrived at the garden early. Ben was already there, unloading supplies from his car. Hey, she said. He looked up, surprised, then smiled. Hey, she took a breath. About the other day, I just wanted you to know I didn't go. Ben paused. Okay. I realized I didn't want what he was offering, she continued, even if part of me was tempted. Ben studied her for a moment, then nodded. That takes clarity. Or stubbornness, she said. Sometimes they look the same, he replied, smiling. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. As they planted the last row, Ben spoke again. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Sara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. So am I, she said. And this time she knew exactly why. Chapter 6. What a future looks like. Sara's apartment had never hosted a man who wasn't being evaluated. She noticed this the moment Ben stepped inside. It wasn't that she'd consciously turned her home into a testing ground, but looking at it now, at the tidy surfaces, the intentional decor, the faint scent of citrus cleaner, she realized how often past dates had entered the space as if it were a stage. She'd watched them watch her, waiting to see what conclusions they drew. Ben didn't do that. He paused just inside the door, taking off his shoes without being asked. Nice place, he said genuinely. It feels calm. Sara blinked. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about it. He smiled, setting the grocery bag he'd brought on the counter. I figured I'd contribute. I didn't know what you liked, so I went with neutral. She peeked inside. Pasta, vegetables, garlic bread. I panicked, he admitted. I'm better with logistics than romance. She laughed. That might be the most reassuring thing you could have said. They moved around the kitchen with an easy rhythm that surprised her. Ben washed his hands and started chopping without being directed. He asked where things were instead of rummaging. When she corrected him on a measurement, he adjusted without defensiveness. Felt cooperative. So, Ben said, stirring the sauce. You cook often? Sara leaned against the counter. When I'm trying to convince myself I have my life together. He chuckled. Relatable. They talked as they cooked, about work deadlines, about his sisters, about her grandmother's birthday and the conversation that had started all of this. Sara hadn't planned on telling him that part, but it came out naturally. She basically told me I was dating the wrong men, Sara said, pouring water into the pot. Not because they were bad people, just because they didn't want what I want. Ben nodded slowly. That's fair. You're not offended? She asked. He smiled faintly. I don't think I'm the kind of man she was warning you against. Sara studied him. No, she said softly. You're not. They ate at the small table by the window. The city hummed outside, distant and unintrusive. This is nice, Ben said after a moment. No pressure. Just dinner. Sara felt a warmth spread through her chest. Yeah, she agreed. It is. Afterward, they moved to the couch. There was space between them, but not distance. Ben kicked off his socks, tucking his feet under himself in a way that was entirely unselfconscious. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. What are you building? He asked. Not your job. Your life. The question landed gently but firmly. Sara thought of Ruth, of the sewing room, of the backyard full of proof. I want a family, she said. surprising herself with how easily the words came. Not immediately, but intentionally. I want a partner who wants that too. Ben nodded. Me too. She turned to look at him. Really? Yeah, he said. I've always thought of life as something you construct, brick by brick, slower that way, but sturdier. Sara smiled, her eyes stinging unexpectedly. That sounds like my grandmother, she said. Smart woman, Ben replied. They sat there, the future unfolding quietly between them. Not as a promise, but as a possibility. Ben stood a little later, glancing at the clock. I should head out. Sara walked him to the door, her heart steady but full. Thank you for tonight, she said. Thank you for inviting me, he replied. There was a pause. Not awkward, considered. I'd like to do this again, Ben said. If you would, Sara smiled. I would. After he left, Sara leaned against the door, closing her eyes. She didn't feel swept away. She felt grounded. And for the first time, that felt like exactly what she'd been looking for. Chapter 7, The Work of Choosing. The first problem arrived quietly. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a betrayal. It didn't announce itself with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived disguised as a scheduling conflict and a misunderstanding so small it almost slipped past unnoticed. Almost. Sara discovered it on a Wednesday afternoon while reviewing her calendar for the following week. A red block stretched across Thursday evening. Client dinner. Mandatory. She frowned. She didn't remember adding that. She opened the email thread. It was real. Last minute. Important. And inconvenient. Her phone buzzed a moment later, as if summoned by her irritation. Ben. Hey, quick question. Are we still on for Thursday? Sara stared at the screen. Thursday. Of course. She closed her eyes, already feeling the familiar tightening in her chest. Old instincts stirred, the urge to cancel, to withdraw, to avoid the discomfort entirely. She typed. Sara, I just found out I have a work thing. Client dinner. I'm really sorry. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Ben, oh. Ben, okay. That was it. No emojis. No reassurance. No follow-up. Sara sat back, unease creeping in. The next day at the garden site, Ben was fine. That was the problem. He greeted her the same way he always did. Worked beside her. Asked about her day. But there was a subtle distance, like he'd taken one careful step back without making a show of it. You seem quiet, Sara said eventually. Ben shrugged. Just thinking. She hesitated, then plunged forward. About Thursday? He met her gaze. A little. I didn't mean to cancel, she said quickly. It just came up. I know, he said. And it's okay. The words were reasonable. Calm. They also felt unfinished. Sara thought of Ruth's voice again. I didn't keep this family together for 61 years by ignoring problems. Ignoring this would be easy, comfortable, familiar. She took a breath. I feel like I disappointed you. Ben paused. I wouldn't say disappointed. Just recalibrating. Recalibrating? She echoed. He smiled faintly. I was looking forward to it. Something loosened in her chest, and something else tightened. I was too, she admitted. And I don't want work to always win by default. Ben studied her for a moment. That matters, he said. They stood there, the unspoken hanging between them. Sara could have let it go, could have accepted the neutral ending and moved on. Instead, she heard herself say, can we reschedule? Not as an afterthought, as a priority. Ben's expression softened. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. That evening, Sara sat alone on her couch, replaying the conversation. She realized something that unsettled her. In the past, she'd treated relationships like auditions, something to be enjoyed until it got complicated. At the first sign of friction, she'd either overcorrected or retreated entirely. This time, she'd stayed. She'd spoken. She'd chosen to do the work. Her phone buzzed. Ben. Saturday night? My place. I'll cook. Ben. No pressure. Just intentional. Sara smiled. Sara, I'd like that. She set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It was better. For the first time, Sara understood what Ruth had meant. Love wasn't about never having problems. It was about deciding over and over again that the future was worth addressing them. Chapter 8, Building, Not Falling. Ben's apartment was smaller than Sara's and messier in a way that felt lived in rather than careless. There were books stacked horizontally and vertically, a half-finished model bridge on the coffee table, a bulletin board crowded with notes and sketches. The place smelled like roasted garlic and something warm and familiar. Welcome to the chaos, Ben said, setting his keys down. Sara smiled, taking it in. It's not chaos. It's progress. He laughed. I'll take that. They cooked together the way they'd learned to, without choreography, without commentary. When Ben burned the bread, he admitted it immediately. When Sara oversalted the sauce, they fixed it together. Nothing became a joke at anyone's expense. Over dinner, the conversation deepened without effort. I used to think love was supposed to feel like falling, Sara said, twirling pasta around her fork. Fast, disorienting, Like you didn't have a choice. Ben nodded. I always thought that sounded terrifying. She smiled. Right? I'm realizing now that I don't want to fall. I want to build. Ben met her gaze, something steady and open there. Me too. After dinner, they sat on the couch, knees brushing. Sara rested her head against his shoulder without thinking about it first. He shifted slightly, accommodating her weight as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This feels different, she said quietly. Good different? Ben asked. Yes, she said. Honest different. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't need this to be dramatic to be meaningful. Sara closed her eyes. Thank you. They didn't kiss right away. When they did, it was unhurried, intentional, less spark, more warmth. Less fireworks, more foundation. Later, walking home under the glow of streetlights, Sara thought of Ruth again, of the sewing room, of the backyard full of laughter. She realized something then, something simple and profound. She hadn't been unwanted. She'd been waiting, unconsciously, for someone who wanted to build the same future. Sara unlocked her apartment door and paused, smiling to herself. Love, she now understood, wasn't about finding the perfect moment. It was about choosing again and again to create one.